So I think we are about ready to start. So want to welcome everyone who is joining this webinar. I will say a couple of words in introduction, and first we'll show you the logo of the Vietnam Peace Commemoration Committee, which is the organizer and the sponsor of this webinar. I'm Jon McAuliff. I serve as coordinator of VPCC. It's existed since 2014. Originally came together with Tom Hayden and David Courtwright to challenge the effort by the Pentagon to give its version of the 50th anniversary of the war. And what we've been doing over the last several years is created events that look at the history as we knew it of the war and the opposition to the war. Like everyone else, the COVID epidemic has meant that we're doing a lot of our work now virtually, using webinars or to share information rather than organizing conferences. And all of these webinars do get put on our YouTube channel. Everybody will get a link to watch it and to share it with other people. And you can also find out about us at our webpage, which is www.vietnampeace.org. Obvious and easy enough to remember. So this webinar was fortuitous, and it was produced by another webinar that we did about the Aaron Sorkin film on the trial of the Chicago 7 that is on Netflix. And in the course of doing that, I received a note from this guy who said that he had a better film. We've been in touch. I went and looked at it, and in fact, he's correct. It is a better film. It's better history, and it conveys aspects of the trial much more effectively and honestly than Sorkin. I mean, Sorkin's film is great and has its own function, and I don't want to diminish it at all, but I think that hopefully you've had a chance to watch it, or you can watch it after this discussion. And then you'll make your own judgment. I'd certainly encourage you to watch Sorkin's also. Two other housekeeping things. I leave the chat on live. Already 2 people have commented. Chat is a way that you can communicate with everybody, with particular panelists, and also with anyone else who is a participant in the call. And what you do is at the bottom right now, if you click on chat, you'll see a screen that shows up. Now, normally it says to all panelists. If you click the little arrow, then you can do all panelists and attendees, which is 100%. You can do individual panelists, and you can do other people that are listed. Now, I think I have organized it so that you're able to see everybody, but I'll double check once we get started on the panelists. The other function that's important to know about is Q&A. Q&A is again, down at the bottom, you can write a question there. Brewster Rhoads will be watching the questions, and he will try and pull them together at the end and try to get expressed what seem to be the most common questions and themes. So without further ado,
you see Kleiser's comment
already? There's lots of people are making chats already. So what we'll have now is the order that is on the blog page. I will put the blog page in the chat. If you can always refer back to it, and you should refer back to it for the bios of the speakers, because I'm just going to give very name identifications at this point, so it doesn't take too much time. Our first speaker is Jon Wiener, who is the author of probably the best book about the Chicago trial, and he will give us some overview before we get into the defendants and those who were involved in the film. Jon.
Thank you. Let me say it's an honor and a pleasure to be on this panel with such terrific people, especially with Bobby Seale. I'm going to go to. You don't need to see me. You need to see my PowerPoint here. No, we're going to go to slideshow. We're going to go to the beginning. I want to thank especially Jeremy Kagan for two things. First of all, for making the film, and second of all, for making it available to us in a beautiful print. Seeing the real defendants and their attorneys on screen talking about the trial while it's being acted out it's thrilling. And so I'm assuming people know the basic outlines of the trial. So I want to talk about some of the background issues. It seemed like all the conflicts in America were distilled and then acted out in that courtroom. In the beginning, just to review briefly, there were. So here's the defendants in the famous photograph on day one, taken by Richard Avedon, which New Press wrapped around the jacket of my book. Lee Weiner is down on the left. John Freund's Abbie, Rennie, Jerry, Tom, Dave Dellinger. Notably missing Bobby Seale from this picture. In the beginning there were, where's my beginning? In the beginning there were two different protests planned. The Yippies, led by Abbie and Jerry, planned this festival of life in the park. It was going to challenge what they called the Festival of Death of the party that was prosecuting the war in Vietnam. They were going to have music, performance, dancing. They talked about sex. And then there was a second, and they wanted to sleep in the park. So they say here, Lincoln Park free motel. This, of course, turned out to be an issue with the police who didn't give a permit for people to stay overnight. And there was a second protest planned by the National Mobilization Committee, the MOB week, and that was a more traditional protest march on the convention to call on the Democrats to end the war. National Mobilization Committee to end the war, confront the war makers in Chicago. Here signed here by Dave Dellinger, also involving Rennie Davis and Tom Hayden. Of course, in practice, permits were denied to everybody, the march and the festival. And the police attacked everybody. So the two, what had started out as two separate protests pretty much merged. I want to talk briefly about three issues sort of before and after the trial, given that we've seen Jeremy's film. I want to talk, first of all, about all the things that should not have happened if justice was to have been served. Then I want to talk about the defense strategies going into the trial. And then I want to talk about understanding the verdicts after the trial. Why? Why did the jury find 5 defendants guilty of incitement to riot? Well, first I want to talk about the things that should not have happened. And here's more from the MOB. This leaflet is actually from the Chicago Public Library show on this. And of course, there was a big movement to protest the trial itself. I'll be showing illustrations from the courtroom drawn by Jules Pfeiffer, the legendary cartoonist usually seen in the Village Voice and in the Sunday papers. On the work of the Attorney General Ramsey Clark of the Democratic administration, LBJ's Attorney General. He published after the trial. He was willing to testify in the trial, and this is shown in the Aaron Sorkin film, although it's not in Jeremy's film, that the Democrats never would have brought these charges. They did not believe there was a conspiracy, even though the protest was against them, and that if Hubert Humphrey had won the election in November of 1968, there never would have been a trial of the Chicago 8, then 7, in 1969. So Attorney General Ramsey Clark later published this list of all the things that were wrong, and I'm drawing on that here. First of all, he said it was wrong for the authorities in Chicago to refuse permits. They should have granted permits. There's a constitutional right to assemble and to speak. Second, the official sanction by Mayor Daley for a police riot. A good mayor would have made it clear that police misconduct would not be tolerated, that police should enforce laws against assault, against vandalism, but the individual should be arrested and charged with specific crimes rather than attacking the entire protest march or all the people in the park. Third, he said the conspiracy charge never should have been brought. These people didn't conspire with each other. A conspiracy is an agreement to break the law, and that was not what they did. And fourth, he went back before this that there was a new law, the second law, the incite to riot, that made inciting a riot a federal crime by saying if you crossed a state line to incite a riot, you were guilty of a federal crime. That law had just been passed in 1968 because of H. Rap Brown, the then head of SNCC. It had never been used before. It's never been used since. And Attorney General Ramsey Clark thought this was a bad law. Congress never should have passed it. There are state laws against violence, assault, vandalism, and those are sufficient. And of course, Bobby Seale, who's with us today, never should have been indicted. He had nothing to do with the planning of the protest. He attended only at the last minute, gave a brief speech where he said the same thing that he and lots of other Black radicals of the age had said thousands of times, and none of them had ever been prosecuted. Bobby Seale should have been allowed to have his own lawyer if he was going to be put on trial, or he should have been allowed to represent himself. Let me just run through some of the other Jules Pfeiffer drawings. Jerry Rubin, Tom Hayden, Rennie. Here's Dave Dellinger. Here's Lee, who's with us today without it. Bill Kunstler, Lennie Weinglass. So here's Bobby, drawn by Jules Pfeiffer, speaking to Judge Julius Hoffman, demanding his constitutional right to represent himself. And of course, the greatest outrage of the trial was the Bobby Seale bound and gagged in the courtroom for demanding his constitutional right to represent himself. Never should have happened. Dramatized very powerfully in Jeremy's movie by Carl Lumbly, actor who played Bobby, who's with us today. This was only 4 days out of a trial that was, 5 months long, but really this was, everything else in this trial, was really pretty insignificant compared to this one spectacle. Everything was dwarfed by the spectacle of a Black man in chains in an American courtroom, and it's what everybody remembers about it today, and it's why we're so thrilled to have Bobby Seale with us today. The courage, the strength, the commitment, the refusal to compromise that he showed is something we still remember and honor and appreciate. So the defendants, just briefly here, my time is flying, had two different ideas about what kind of defense to mount. Abbie and Jerry wanted to disrupt the proceedings, to desanctify the courtroom, to delegitimize the judge and the prosecution by using humor, ridicule, to try to accomplish these goals. Tom, in particular, wanted to win over at least a couple of the jurors with factual challenges to the prosecution case that would avoid guilty verdicts. If there was a hung jury, there would, of course, be no guilty verdicts, and the defendants would stay out of jail. In practice, both strategies were deployed at different points. There were whole months where there were no yippee courtroom antics. And there was a lot of work challenging the testimony of the put forward by the prosecutors. But in the end, both of these strategies didn't succeed, and the jury brought in guilty verdicts against 5 of the defendants on the incitement charge. Oh, during the here, I like this one. The conspiracy stomp. During the trial, the defendants were out every night giving speeches, often to thousands of people, going to different benefits. This is being auctioned by Heritage Auction. You can go online and bid on this one. Benefit for the Chicago 8. Great little list there of all the people who were participating in the conspiracy stomp at the Aragon Ballroom. Here's the jury that brought in what they regarded as a compromise verdict. John Freunds and Lennie Weinglass not guilty of all charges. Everyone not guilty on the conspiracy charge, but 5 defendants guilty on the incitement charge. Why? How many minutes do I have left here? How many minutes do I have left?
John, you're over.
All right, I will stop here. Let's talk about this during the discussion. So that's what was wrong with the trial. I hope we can talk about the verdicts later. Thanks to Jeremy for the film, and I'm looking forward to what everybody else has to say.
Great, thank you very much, John. There we go. The person who wrote to me, the creator of this film, of Conspiracy, the Trial of the Chicago 8, is Jeremy Kagan. Again, I've put on this chat the link to the page, which has everybody's biography, both personal and professional, and you'll be very impressed with the many things that Jeremy has done since the trial. Yep, Jeremy, go ahead.
Well, first of all, thank you all for taking the time to be with us. And I know how strange a time it is. It's actually sort of a personal honor to see Bobby and Carl and Lee and Michael, who all were involved in this particular film that we made back in 1987. And I want to talk about 2 issues really as quickly as I can. One is, in fact, a giant issue, which is truth. And the issue of truth in relationship to media. Something that we're all facing today, every single day, when you watch any kind of media. What's the truth? And there's an interesting distinction between a storyteller and what we call the poetic license, and the issue of disinformation or misinformation, because it's a good story. And that was something that I was confronting a number of times, because I grew up with a very progressive family, coming from about 3,000 years of tradition of progressive and lots of histories of suffering and identifying with the sufferer. I grew up during the time of the Vietnam War. I grew up with the possibility of being drafted, and something I wasn't going to do because I was a conscientious objector. I grew up partly in the neighborhood of where people like Abbie, Hoffman, and Jerry Rubin, this is Lower East Side, were living at the time, protesting this war. I thought, by the way, this was probably the worst time in American history. Wrong. Maybe we're living the worst time in American history right now. Forget the Civil War, of course, I'll go back there. But the issue of truth and the issue of storytelling, and how a story can actually change your awareness and potentially motivate your behavior. So I was very interested, as I became a filmmaker, in making films that would be dealing with social issues. And in 1975, I made a movie called Catherine. It became quite scandal because ABC that I wrote and directed for tried to not show it, censor it because they found it an un-American film. It was loosely based on the life of a woman named Diana Oughton, and it covered 6 years in the life of someone being radicalized, as people are being radicalized today, realizing things like the injustice of civil rights, the injustice of America's involvement in other countries' politics, the injustice, obviously, of war. And it led to a movement that during the post this event that we're talking about, and here the actors and the real defendants are behind me, it led to some people becoming part of what was called the Weather Underground, which actually was condoning in its own right that violence may be the only answer to actually causing change in a corrupt society. So I made this movie. This movie, as I said, got scandalized and then got written about and then got shown. And then what happened was that CBS approached me and asked me if I would make a movie based on the conspiracy trial, which I knew about, but I was not in Chicago during the time of the convention. I was in New York protesting, and I wasn't at the trial, although I saw the, on TV, the little cartoons that you see every evening. And there was a very good play that was actually in LA that was based on all the transcripts. And I thought, yes, this is a good idea. I went back and I read all the transcripts, and I read all of the journalists who were there, and thought, I'm going to use the truth. In other words, I'm going to just make something that, in fact, just is what was said in this courtroom and observed by journalists. And that would be it. I wasn't going to make up anything else. It was all going to be based on what actually was said. And I was going to do something different. But CBS, after they read it, said this is, even though there were people like George C. Scott who wanted to play parts in the movie, CBS said this is too anti-American, we're not going to make it. I had the great experience of really now indulging in knowing all about the trial as much as I could, but that was it. Years later, there was an article written in TV Guide saying the best scripts that never got made. It turned out that this script that I'd written was the first one they wrote about. HBO had just started. HBO approached me. I said, I have a special way I want to do this. Are you willing? And they said, sure. They gave me a very limited amount of time and money, but I got commitment from some spectacular actors. But what I did is I traveled around the country and interviewed for 3 hours every single one of the defendants and the lawyers. And this is now on an archive thing that I'm going to lead you to in about a second or two. And so I said, I want to integrate the real people with the actors saying the things that were said in the trial. And I wanted also something else special. I wanted the jury to be us, so that anytime the judge or one of the lawyers would look at the jury, they'd look directly into the camera, looking at you, so that you would be the jury of what's going on. And that was the experience that I wanted to create for us. And I'm going to take us for a second to this new website that I just created, which I hope you can see. Literally because of what the new film, and I credit the new film because it's getting people to pay attention to this time. And as you can see on this particular website, there's information about the film. There are videos, and those of you who are historically interested in, these are intense 3-hour videos with, here's Abbie Hoffman, the famous Tom Hayden, here's Rennie Davis. There's some, by the way, there's some scenes of the riots that happened in '68 that are here that actually have never been seen before because I got them from a professor who happened to get 16 millimeters that was never shown on television. You can see here the lawyers, there's Kunstler, there's Lennie Weinglass, John Freund, and of course, Bobby as well. These are actually, I think, phenomenal archives for those of you who are interested in really delving in to who these people are, and why they did what they did. And here's access to the film. And I want to just show one quick clip, if I can do this without messing it up and being too loud. Let's see if I can do this. So that you can, those of you who haven't seen the movie can get an idea of what we were attending here.
Okay, by raising your head up and down.
Give me yours, sir.
I can't understand you, sir.
I want to defend myself. I have the right to speak on behalf of my Constitution.
Mr. Marshall, I don't think you have accomplished your purpose by that contrivance. We will take another recess.
I want to speak on behalf of my constitutional rights. You can't deny me my rights. You can't deny me my constitutional rights.
Bobby Seale's only attempt in that courtroom was an attempt to represent himself.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I must tell you the law requires that the judge maintain order and take such steps as are warranted. Accordingly, the marshals have endeavored to maintain order in the manner that you see here in the courtroom.
Your Honor, I move on behalf of the other 7 defendants for the immediate removal of the gag and the arm and the leg cuffs. Mr. Seale was only attempting to assert his rights to self-defense under the Constitution.
I direct you, ladies and gentlemen, not to hold it against any of the 7 other defendants when these measures are taken with respect to defendant Mr. Seale. These measures indicate no evidence of his guilt or lack of guilt.
The marshals would take an hour, maybe 2 hours before the trial began, trying to force this gauze into his mouth.
That's it. No, man. See, man, what the fuck going on? No, what are we trying to prove, Your Honor?
We won't go in there and sit in the trial while Bobby Seale is bound and gagged.
Meanwhile, Bobby and the Panthers are saying, don't do anything.
Mr. Properly, you indicated to the prosecutor that you received instructions from your superior.
Okay, I think you get the sense of the way this particular movie was being presented. I wanted to have us interface, meaning us who look at it, with this as if we are the jury. And then I obviously wanted to be able to have the real people who I'd interviewed be able to comment on what the actors were doing at the same time. And there was a wonderful moment between Abbie, the last day of shooting. A lot of the defendants were able to come to actually shoot. That's what this photograph is behind me. And one of the things is that there was a moment when Jerry Rubin actually Heil Hitlered this judge who was a total, arrogant bully. And the question is, did Jerry stand on the table or did he do it on the floor? And here was Jerry and Abbie and Tom, who were all there, kind of discussing, well, what really happened? What was the actual truth? And both Abbie and Tom turned to me and said, the transcripts were the first truth. The journalists writing about it were the second. The people who wrote books about it were the third. Your movie is now going to be, quote, the truth. And now when we think about it, the new movie is representing the truth. And personally, although I think it's got a great dramatic stuff going on in it, there are lots of things that are misrepresentations, particularly the treatment of David Dellinger, who never hit anybody, never would. But I hope you experience both movies, and I hope they stimulate you to realize we have to take responsibility in actually making our society a just one. So thanks for being here.
Thank you, Jeremy. The spirit of your words is infused in the film. One of the things that VPCC is trying to do is create a community of the people like us, like you, most of the people watching this webinar, who were part of the anti-war movement, while we still can contribute our experience to American society and speak for ourselves rather than just be footnotes in the PhD thesis 20 years from now. In this creation of community, one example is Jeremy pointing out his film. Another is when we were setting up this program, I got a note from someone saying, hey, you really ought to invite my friend to speak. He was he was one of the lawyers. He was in fact the assistant to Lennie Weinglass and then became the partner of Lennie Weinglass, Stuart Ball.
Jon, Delighted to be here, everybody. Thank you.
Speak up a little bit, Stuart, please.
I'm trying to push a little closer and talk a little
Yes.
louder. I have been delighted to be able to reminisce and reflect largely as a result of the Sorkin movie, which has regenerated a bunch of attention. So I carry on and rant on with my friends and my progressive friends for many years. But more importantly, I have been able to engage and talk and carry on with a bunch of millennials and Gen Zers that I've had the great pleasure and privilege to encounter as a result of years of high school soccer coaching and years of adjuncting as a U.S. history professor at the local community college. And I think that the connections to the young people are particularly important because those of us of a certain age who've had the experiences that we've had, we have a certain obligation to pay it forward. And that's what I've chosen to do as much as possible. But it highlighted something for me in watching the movie. Because of my focus on the younger folks, I noticed in the movie, Jeremy, that almost every interview, and even from the transcripts of the trial, the defendants continually said, it's going to be the young people that rise up and cause the revolution. It's going to be the young people that abolish the Julius Hoffmans of the world and bring in an era of cooperation and justice and love and friendship. Well, frankly, I think many of us would say that that was a bit grandiose and naive, but it brings me to the current. And I think at some point we have to start tying the discussion of the trial to today. And I hear a lot of progressives, including myself, saying, oh, it's the next generation. They're so progressive, they're so enlightened, they're so activist. It's going to change things. And the question that I raise for everybody here today is, are we wrong again, or is this time different? My view is it's really different this time, but that's for a whole different discussion. The second thing I'd like to raise is Marjorie Fritz Burch. She's been in the chat, if you've been watching. I noticed her in the chat in the last webinar, and the name rang a bell with me because I remember the juror, Jean Fritz. The juror, Jean Fritz, was a powerful moving force on the faction that was moving for acquittal of all the defendants. The trial was deeply split. It was 8-4. The jury was 8-4. 8 for conviction and 4 for acquittal. And the verdict, John, was in fact a compromise verdict engineered by another juror whose name escapes me at the moment. Don't forget that Lee and John were acquitted on all counts. Everybody was acquitted on the conspiracy count and only the 5 convictions on the substantive count. So it was a compromise verdict. And we all knew Jean Fritz was in there pulling for us. We all appreciated her. But I made the connection with Marjorie after the last seminar, and I was delighted to be able to make that connection because she is the daughter of Jean Fritz, and she has taken the time and energy to look back at what this meant for her mom and who her mom was and how her mom evolved in the parts of this trial. And it's a very compelling story. I know that John plans to call on her later on, so I'm going to let her tell the story. But I will just tell on my own behalf, engaging with Marjorie has brought me a whole new understanding of the depth and breadth of that woman's courage in standing up for what she thought under immense pressure and difficult circumstances. So I look forward to hearing from Marjorie. My third story is that in looking back at this and in looking at where we are today, we have to come back to the issue of racism. There is no escaping it. I think Jeremy said that the Bobby Seale events at the trial dwarfed everything else, and I completely agree. The government-sponsored racism that was so blatant and so obvious during the trial is with us yet again today. And we have to look at the trial and the experience of Bobby and learn those lessons and bring them to bear today. I'm going to leave it to Bobby and Carl to talk more about that. I will move now to a story. Bobby, I don't know whether you remember this. I hope maybe you do. And if I get some of this wrong, please correct me. But before the trial, I spent the summer in Chicago doing trial prep. I was watching video footage from all of the networks, sorting out this film of the police beating up people in Lincoln Park, this film of police beating up people in Grant Park, and sorting that out for use as evidence. And Bobby Seale, the defendants were in and out, and the lawyers were in and out, and I was kind of holding the fort. But Bobby was in jail in California. And we never were able to quite communicate or work that out. And then all of a sudden we learned, Bobby, correct me if I'm wrong, that the U.S. Marshals packed Bobby into a car, unbeknownst to anybody, and drove him across country via a circuitous route and dumped him in Cook County Jail in the middle of Chicago without anybody knowing about it. I think we first learned about it from Fred Hampton. Fred was the chairman of the Black Panther Party in Chicago. And it was in consulting with Fred, we decided that we should try to get Bobby Seale into, Fred Hampton in to see Bobby, because he had to have some connection with his people. So Fred tried to go in to see him. Fred was barred at the door. Why was Fred barred at the door? It turns out that the summer before the trial, Fred Hampton was in the community in the west side of Chicago, in the African-American neighborhood, and there was a Good Humor truck. And the Good Humor man was driving through this neighborhood, and Fred intervened with the Good Humor man and, shall we say, persuaded him to liberate the Good Humor bars for the kids in the neighborhood. As a result of that, Fred Hampton had a conviction. The conviction made him ineligible to go see Bobby Seale. So Fred and the lawyers and the defendants decided we should make a motion with Judge Hoffman to let Fred Hampton in to see Bobby Seale. It turned out that at this particular moment, I was the only one in Chicago. The lawyers were out speaking, the defendants were out speaking. So it came to me to do this. I had just graduated law school. I had never set foot in a courtroom. I hadn't even gotten the results from the bar yet. Oh, I got 3 minutes. I'll try to rush. What happened was that it came to me to do this. We called the court. For some strange reason, Judge Hoffman agreed to come down on a Saturday to hear my motion to have Fred Hampton get in to see Bobby Seale. And I showed up. I didn't have a suit. I found a tie somewhere. I had my shaggy jacket and my hair down to my waist. And I showed up and I played it completely straight. I said to the judge, I'm not a lawyer yet. I'm a law graduate, but I have this motion that we think is important. And he said, go ahead. I'll hear from you. And then at some point, as I was speaking, he figured out that he ran in the same circles as my father and that I was a terrible disgrace to my father. And he's turned on me and went completely pear-shaped and threw me out of the courtroom and called me a disgrace and threatened to investigate me. And the connection is that when this conviction was ultimately overturned by the Court of Appeals in the Third Circuit, one of the reasons for overturning the conviction was that the judge was hopelessly biased against the defendants, which of course he was. But one of the proofs that he was biased against the defendants in a footnote in the Third Circuit Court of Appeals was a little footnote about how he treated me. And that proved that he was biased, and that enabled to get the convictions reversed for the defendants. One final note, Fred Hampton. Let me just say that I was privileged to encounter Fred on several occasions during the months before he was assassinated. Even at age 25, it was clear to me that this was a special person. This young man was smart, informed, wise beyond his years, incredibly charismatic. He was an important figure in the civil rights movement. It is no accident that he was assassinated. It is not just the fact that the police happened upon raid a home where he was living. This was a target. J. Edgar Hoover level knew that this man was a powerful potential figure. They wanted him out of the way, and he was assassinated. I, to this day, admire Fred Hampton and truly wish that he were still with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. So one of the things we're doing in both this webinar and the previous one is to give a chance for the defendants themselves to speak. Lee Weiner was found not guilty. and will describe his own view of the trial and of its verdict. Lee.
Oh, Jesus. All right. So look, the charm of this is that the trial has become a myth. And so, and we're still around. I mean, I'm assuming that Jeremy, you know, you kind of feel like Homer must have felt when somebody kind of ripped off the story about Troy again. But, you know, look, both in August of 1968 and in the trial that followed, people were acting in their best political way. They were trying to fight on the streets against injustice, against the war, against a brutal and demeaning culture. And that effort, sorry, it's Google trying to talk to me. That effort continued in the trial. The very things that they accused us of in terms of organizing the riots in '68 were the skills and the strengths that we brought to the trial to fight against in the court. John's notion that there were two strategies, I actually counted them up. I mean, I wrote a book recently, Conspiracy to Riot, appropriately enough. And I figured something like 12 different strategies. I mean, the truth is, there was no strategy, there was no suggestion made by any defendant that we didn't at one time or another try to do. It was essentially the same way that we acted on the streets in '68. That there was no notion that, I mean, there were only a certain number of streets. So we had to be together. Wherever he was in the park, so we had to be together. And similarly in the courtroom, it was everybody's trial. Now it's true, little known, previously unknown story. My father actually did once ask me, well, why don't you get your own attorney? I said, yeah, I don't think that's going to work. The people are right to identify Bobby's travail and the hideousness.
Lee, we've lost you. We're not getting any sound from you.
Not at all.
Okay. All right, now we got you again.
Oh, Jeremy, I'm so sorry. It must be Google. I blame it all on them. I don't know. Look, the truth is that the trial, the demonstrations in '68 and the trial itself, none of us were virgins. We all had been arrested. We'd all been in jail. We all knew what we were doing. We were opposed to the war. We were opposed to an exploitative capitalist system and a culture that was demeaning and brutal. And we fought against it in the streets, and we fought against it in the courtroom. And in some wonderful way, I hope that Jeremy's film, the newer movies, the older ones, help convey to people that politics is not just about money and power, but instead it becomes a context in which one can live one's best life. One can become committed and active to make the world a better place. That's what we're trying to do. And that's what young people are trying to do now, with larger crowds on more streets than we ever had. Good for them. There is a connection between then and now, besides my book. I had this great conversation with one of my sons, comparing the gas that was used in Chicago in '68 and the gas that was used this summer in Portland. Portland, it was harder, it was tougher. I mean, in Chicago, you could wash it off with milk and crap like that. But in Portland, the stuff they're using now, it powders up and hangs around for a long time. So life is tougher on the street. But some of my kids were there. So it goes on. Stu, I don't know. I mean, certainly there is the notion of blacks and whites together on the street is surely more real now, in greater numbers now, than it was then. That's just simply the truth. And that certainly is a good thing. Will people hold on to the notions of themselves as political actors, as people, as essential part of their identity as being political? I hope so. Don't know so. I knew a lot of people back in the day who floated away and not inappropriately tried to construct different lives. I was lucky. Part of it was luck, part of it's being white, cisgender, heterosexual, all kinds of educational credentials, have grown up in a fairly comfortable way. So I was able to escape a great deal of the punishment wreaked upon other folks. But I was able to continue working politically all these years, doing different kinds of work, mostly ameliorative, trying to help individual people, groups of people in different places at different times. It counts. It's not making revolution in the streets, but it's certainly a step in the right direction. And I will not go any further. So there, you can have the extra 3 minutes.
Okay. Thank you, Lee. The indictments of the Chicago 8 are what everybody knows about, the trial of the Chicago 8. I didn't even realize it until I got a note after our first webinar that there was a whole lot of unindicted co-conspirators. And then if you looked within that list, there were 4 women included in the unindicted co-conspirators. They didn't make it into the starring roles of indicted conspirators, but that wasn't for lack of the contribution that they made to what was going on. We were able to find Corinna Fales, who was one of the unindicted co-conspirators, to give her perspective on what was happening during the demonstrations and afterwards. Corinna.
Thank you, John, and hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting me into the conversation. I'm actually going to read my opening remarks because I want to say some things precisely, so forgive me. By way of reference, I was a full-time civil rights activist and then worked for about 4 years on the SDS Community Organizing Project in Newark, New Jersey, where Tom Hayden also worked. So I knew Tom well and Rennie somewhat. I also knew Lennie Weinglass and Stuart Ball from Newark. I never had yippie inclinations, nor did I know Bobby Seale, John Froines, or Lee. Before I tell you why I was named an unindicted co-conspirator, I want to thank Jeremy and everybody who contributed to making Conspiracy, which put the horror of the Vietnam War front and center and focused rightly on Bobby Seale's unconscionable treatment with a powerful performance by Carl Lumbly. Michael Lembeck was also terrific as Abbie. I appreciated all the other acting and actors too, though Tom, as was the case with Sorkin's film, did not come through to me as Tom, which left me wondering why that happened in both movies. Most of all, I appreciated this film for its accuracy, which spurred me to look back at those days with fresh and definitely much older eyes. The juxtaposition of war images with the behavior of some of the boys took my breath away, frankly. And I was struck in a new way by the fact that 3 mostly separate strands of change efforts came together and were tried in that courtroom. The yippies and their cultural revolution were there, SDS MOB, an anti-war movement, but also agents for broader political change were there, and the Panthers and growing militancy of Blacks were there. So I think the 60s were on trial, not just free speech. Most people don't even know that there were any unindicted co-conspirators, as you just said, John, let alone 16 of us. I was one of 3 women who were arrested together and included on that list. We 3 were probably the most high profile because the Chicago Tribune ran an article on our arrest. To fill you in what happened, on what happened, I'm going to read an excerpt from my book titled, "This Book is Not a Safe Space, The Unintended Harm of Political Correctness." The excerpt may prompt you to recall what a government informer said in the film about John Freund's making butyric acid, incendiary devices, etc. It's interesting that I still can't remember how our case was resolved or what happened with the 2 other women. Our trial was separated from the boys, probably for sexist reasons. And I think I was, in the end, sternly warned to behave and eventually sent on my way. Now, a slightly edited excerpt from the chapter in my book titled Cook County Jail. Cook County was my last arrest and the only one I'm not proud of. Threatened with beatings, rape, and a sentence of 25 years, I had only put myself in harm's way to impress a man I had worked with in Newark. And yes, that would be Tom Hayden. And though I name him here, I do not use any names in the book. When you lose your integrity and sacrifice yourself for something you don't believe in and are not proud of, you better learn something from it, and you better be prepared for the consequences, because it's totally different from taking a risk for something you know is right. Most of the time in Chicago, I was working at headquarters in communications. But after the police tear gas demonstrators, Tom asked a few of us women, all women, of course, if we would be willing to, quote, bring the tear gas inside the hotels where the convention delegates were housed and the meetings were held. He said women could get more easily past security. I volunteered because he was a big cheese to us, and I wanted him to think I was cool. I also didn't want to be the one woman in that tiny select group who refused. But I thought it was a silly, stupid, meaningless thing to do. It was not like me at all, not my form of protest, and it made me very uncomfortable. It also turned out to be a hell of a way to get my mugshot in the Chicago Tribune. 3 of us went to a club in the Palmer House in Chicago with vials of butyric acid in our purses. Butyric acid smells like vomit. And one spilled it onto the carpet beneath the table where we sat. A couple of large men immediately popped up out of nowhere and took her away, but they completely disregarded the other 2 of us because they obviously didn't realize we were together. We split up and went separate ways. I could have gotten away then if I had just left, but no. I sat down in the lobby of the hotel trying to decide what to do about my vial of butyric acid and my friend who had gotten caught. I felt guilty that I was free, and so perhaps did the other woman who got away, because we both ended up getting caught. And then, just as I made a half-hearted, undecided move to leave, I spied a Newark judge in whose court I had appeared for one of my arrests. Apparently, he was a convention delegate from New Jersey. I was outraged that he should represent anyone, and spun around, went back toward the Palmer House, and ducked into the women's room, where I emptied my butyric acid in a large planter, as if that were an act of real retribution for the judge's wrongs, and as if he used the ladies' room. Ridiculous, but I felt like I couldn't leave without emptying my vial. Then I went back to see what happened to my friend, found the room where they were holding her, and peered inside. Yep, I stood there peering like an idiot. And of course, that's when I got arrested. They separated us for questioning. The DA threatened to beat me with rubber hoses because they don't leave marks, he said. He gleefully told me what the female inmates would do to us, and he read off the list of felony charges he intended to press that would get us 25 to life. I was stone-faced. I hated him too much to show fear or say a word. You can do anything you want to me, I thought. I will not crack. They threw us in the jail. I had always been able to talk to anyone because I'm genuinely interested in people, and I don't think I'm better than anyone else. I had nothing against these inmates, all of whom, as I recall, were Black and overtly lesbian. I was not scared. They were not alien to me, only they were. They were huge, they were cold, they were predators, and they were tough as hell. They lived in a completely open cell block without a second of privacy. That place would have stripped you of any humanity you had just to survive. I tried talking to one woman, and she just shot back at me that they were going to get me that night. So no, I did not have a conversation with her or any of the other inmates. Fear does not describe what I felt. Then suddenly, 20 minutes before lockdown for the night, we were told that some Chicago liberals, and yes, I'm aware of being white, had bailed us out. I have never been so grateful before or since. Cook County was a terrifying lesson about my integrity. Tom did not make me do that idiotic stunt, I did it. And I learned from it not to sacrifice myself again for anything or anyone I do not fully embrace. I also learned that low roads do not lead to anywhere I want to be or to anyone I want to be with. Sound harsh? Well, it was a harsh lesson. Chicago changed me, and that was a good and necessary thing. What happened in Chicago was a brutal, vicious police riot for which there is no defense. But let us not pretend that it was unprovoked. Let us not pretend that we stood on some moral high ground and that our leadership, with the exceptions of Dave Dellinger and later on Bobby Seale in the courtroom, did their best to keep things peaceful and protect demonstrators. No one could probably have controlled that huge streaming crowd, but Tom's communications, for one, were not in the direction of de-escalation or peacekeeping. I think leadership like that is irresponsible, and it stands in stark relief to the training, care, and discipline of the civil rights movement. Though I remember well why the 60s drove us nuts, I will not give us a hall pass. I want us to learn. I think that Chicago reverberated far beyond Nixon's election and plays a role in our deep present day divide. Certainly the 60s did. Here in North Carolina, I am keenly aware of the very different values that people hold dear. When I thanked Todd Gitlin for his terrific review in The Prospect, he quoted Dylan, "Let us not speak falsely now, the hour is getting late." So I would like us to consider, what did we want to accomplish by Chicago and what did we accomplish? I hope we can discuss Chicago in relation to our country today. Thanks.
Thank you, Corinna. There are lots of stuff to come back to. I was in Chicago. At that point, I was head of an organization of former Peace Corps volunteers, the Committee of Returned Volunteers, and somebody commented on the film Medium Cool. For about 15 seconds, you will see our banner of the Committee of Returned Volunteers not on the first day, but on the second day. Any rate, it was an event that is still argued about as to the consequences of it in terms of the demonstrations. But again, we'll come back to that later. So the memory of people is captured by actors who identify from their preparation and from their own skills what it is that they want to communicate with the director and from within themselves about the person when it's based on reality, about the person that they are portraying. Michael Lembeck was Abbie Hoffman in Jeremy's film. Again, look at his bio in terms of his professional credits. And you may well have seen him at another point, but Michael, go ahead.
Thanks, John. Mostly I want to take my time talking about Abbie. He was as affable, as available, as accessible as any human being could ever be. I spent many nights prior to our first day of rehearsal or production looking at every tape ever, everything Jeremy sent me, anything Abbie sent me, and everything else I could find, not to replicate Abbie, but to make sure I captured his spirit. You know, in that Handelman article in '89 in the Rolling Stone, there was so much about manic depressive and troubled, and that's why he made jokes and he needed to be the center of the cyclone. And I have a very different experience of him. Everything that I saw about him and the relationship I began with him before, cultivated during, and kept on, maintained afterwards, is unique and something I will have with me the rest of my life, tucked away in my heart, because he was really special to me. He was an exposed nerve. He was, you know, one of the things about the other film that I found upset me, and this is a personal experience, of course, was how laconic that person was and how Abbie never was. when I first met him, he of course went for the joke and gave me a little button that said, the CIA, what's so intelligent about the CIA? And that was the last joke he ever made with me. From that point forward, he always put his organs on the table. And for Abbie, he did have a need to be relevant, but it was genuine and it was authentic. And it wasn't about being in the light. It was about making a difference and wanting a place in the world in which he could impact our culture, particularly in the area of social injustice. When I finally did get to meet him in person the first time was the day before. I'm not sure, Jeremy, if it's the last day or they were there for 2 days. I think Abbie was. And he walked to our table. I hope you can see this. This is the table that we worked at during the shoot. And Abbie and Tom and Jerry walked over to the table and they walked around it and they looked at it and they said, how did you know that our table looked like that? We boys, we actors at the table, never left the table. We never wanted to be without each other. We wanted to be just like it might have been, which is always in that room. And because we're always in that room for as many days as we shot, and Jeremy, honestly, I don't remember, we began to build up the detritus of what goes on during the day, whether it's vitamin capsules or health bars or papers or whatever it is. And we built up this kind of toxic, that's not props, that's all ours, this toxic site. And the three boys came to the table and began to bicker about whose mess was where. And they were so overtaken by it. But the major dynamic of the day for me, and maybe Bobby will, Carl will speak to this, I don't know, is we're not playing people who are gone, which is the usual. The uniqueness of this is we're not only playing people who are alive, they're in the room. And so you found yourself behaving, interacting with the other actors, and then checking and seeing how you were doing. You literally would leave your body for a moment and say, God, I hope Abbie liked that. And Barry Miller was so insecure when Jerry was there. All we talked about was, do you think I did okay? How did I do? And it was unnerving because we wanted to please them. We wanted to be as accurate as possible. And it's a dynamic I'll never forget. I've never had an experience like that, where I was constantly checking in with somebody while I'm supposed to be invested in a scene. The biggest, that which is deepest in my heart, having to do with Abbie, was his damaged and saddened self. We got to the point where I don't know why me, maybe because I was safe. I didn't have any history with him, but he put his organs on the table with me on a fairly daily basis. And he literally said, I took notes on everything he ever said to me. And I found this note in my folder the other day, which was, he said, there's no place for me anymore. So it wasn't just the relevance issue, and it wasn't, he had no place, nothing to support. Nobody would listen to him. Nobody cared about him anymore. I will always be convinced, as he got sadder and more damaged, that's what killed him. He couldn't take, this is just one man, not a clinical anything, but just somebody who had a relationship with him. But Abbie's sadness having to do with his place in the world, or lack of, and he didn't feel relevant anymore, which he lived for. He wanted to impact culture, was so prevalent in each and every conversation we had or time we spent together. So I really value the movie, one, because Jeremy created this incredible space for us to work in, and he's the most loving director. And as I became a director, I take him with me all the time, how he interacts with people. Two, the family that we became at that table, and how all of us rooted for each other, and there was no ego. All we wanted to do was to make those guys proud of us and say something important. And coming from transcript, hopefully educate and enlighten the viewers, the audience, that this is what happened. I can't wait till Bobby talks, by the way. We should give him power because his stories are incomparable. So that's basically it. You know, when you shoot a movie, you never shoot it in order. You shoot per location, where you're going to go next and where you're going to go next. And Jeremy afforded us the opportunity to shoot this in order. And that's why that table grew, because we never left the table. We lived at the table and we shot in order from beginning to end. And that also, this won't impact you if you're not an actor, but it's a real advantage to know where you came from, so you know what the next moment is. And it was an extraordinary experience. I'm gonna stop because I want Bobby to have more time. So that's basically what I wanted to share today. My love for Abbie and how deeply I feel that pain of feeling like no one cares and there's not a place for you anymore, because he was an astonishing human being. Okay.
Thank you, Michael. So I don't need to say much more about the next speaker. First of all, everybody's already referred to him and introduced him, and everybody who's watching this knows of him and saw him powerfully portrayed, and you're going to meet the actor who portrayed him also. Bobby Seale, founder of the Black Panther Party and probably the most known of the defendants. Bobby.
Yeah, what is Carl Lumbly going to say here? I always like Carl. Carl did a great job. Of course, we had some good conversations when he came out to, you know, interview and talk with me before he played the role. And I like Carl. Carl, he did a great job. I'm here also to pan the other film in the sense that they gutted out all of my protest activity, you know, getting hit in the chest and knocked into the chair. And if Lee Weiner remembers, all of our chairs had wheels on them and it rolled back. I fell to the floor, etc. And then, you know, went through a whole hassle. Another time there was a third level of gagging that never got even drawn by the artist because everything happened so fast, all in a minute. When they brought me out of the lockup room in a chair, these three guards, these were moonlighting guards from Cook County Jail. They was really Cook County Jail guards, but they were giving them a little temporary marshal badge, carrying the chair. My head is bandaged up with ace bandages, 2 or 3 of them, wrapped all around my whole head like a mummy. The only thing you can see is my eyes and my nose, but the gag is right up there. My arms are strapped to the armchair. These are heavy wooden chairs. My legs are strapped to the legs of the big heavy wooden chair. This is the last gagging scene that when they brought me out, and as fast as they brought me out, Constable Lim is arguing again with the judge, and the prosecutors are trying to talk over each other, and even Judge Julius Hoffman gets involved, talking over them, and they talking over each other. These guys try to get the chair up, and the judge says, well, take him out if he needs assistance. And they start to pick up the chair. Goliath, I nicknamed these guys, you know what I mean? I had Goliath, Nummy, and Slim. And Goliath, this big African-American guy, you know, he hated us all. He didn't give a damn about your color or whatever. I don't know what was wrong with the mentality of this guy. But while in this chair, they picked me up. I turned my hand over under the straps, trying to get my fingers to the gag, and he turned it down and popped me in the face. Jerry Rubin jumps up and says, you see, he hit Bobby for nothing or something like that. They're still grabbing the chair again. They lose balance, pick the chair up, and then I turn my hand over again. Goliath let go. He's in the front of the chair of one side, and he turns my hand over and popped me in the face again, and with his fist. And then as fast as this happens, all of this happens like in a minute and a half. This is why the artist never got a chance to even draw the real gagging scene here. And as they were moving towards trying to get to the door to the little lockup, you had 12 chairs, folding metal chairs that the drawing artists sit in. And these guys lost balance with this chair, and it fell over into those chairs. I'm on my back, and I got it up to get, and then Goliath, before it fell, he turned me over again. The chair falls in. The artists throw their pads around, they're jumping out of the way, etc. And as we fall down, and I'm on my back looking up. And the next thing I know, Goliath is coming at me, but he trips and causes himself to come, and his fist comes down and hits me right in the testicles. Now, Lee, you got to remember this to show to this fact. When he hit me in the testicles, I got the gag off, caught my breath, but everything quieted down in terms of arguments with the lawyers when that chair fell. And I shouted out, "You hit me in my balls, motherfucker!" And that court recorder, I know she got that for me.
That was the ball game.
Wait a minute, let me finish this right quick, so I'll show you what. So they picked the chair up. I'm horizontal. They're carrying the chair into the lockup. They verticalize it. They're taking the gag off. And as they're taking the gag off, I'm telling these guys, I'm going to take you all to court. You violated the 8th Amendment of the Constitution, blah, 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 blah. And then I says, no, I'm going to take the damn judge to court too with your asses. And they're taking the gun. Now, Arizona, I call him Arizona because he's a black guy that they flew in from Arizona. He had a nice conservative style Western suit, you know, but he was a very intelligent guy, you know what I mean? The other guys were real moonlighter guards, you know, whatever. My point is, and so he must have went back and told Judge Jules Hoffman how I was going to take him to court. Because I was angry, you know, inside the lockup. They changed that script. I believe that court recorder, she actually put it down, "You hit me in my balls, motherfucker." And then so Judge Jules Hoffman probably had her change that script to say that Jerry Rubin says, "Don't hit me in my balls, motherfucker." You see what I mean? So that's gutting out the real protests, activity, where I'm coming from, etc. Hey, that's probably the most dynamic. It was 3 forms of gagging. The very first one, remember, was in a metal folding chair with metal handcuffs, metal leg cuffs, all hooked to the metal folding chair. Tape across my mouth, around there, just some tape. I want my right to defend myself, etc., etc., etc. But they had brought the jury in. And then we started this argument. And then Judge Julius Hoffman, "Mr. Seale, will you acknowledge that you will not disrupt this courtroom by shaking your head up and down?" I says, "I want my rights, I want my rights." And then I said, oh, I remembered something. Years ago, I had read, a person that's pulling at the chains is acting in the manner of a free person. And clang, 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 I got this noise going on. The judge sent the jury out. One of the jurors got a handshake, she's crying or something. But all of this, I mean, that is the same. Now, this stuff I've written in screenplay. I've written it. I taught myself how to write a screenplay. I'm talking about slug lines, flow of dialogue, what have you, etc. And this is part of my life story, because now we got to do my life story in a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hour series or something like that, a 6 hour series. But this is important to me to get this. And so I'm going to be correcting a lot of other stuff. All the lies that's been propagated out there that were lies pushed to the counterintelligence program of the FBI and everybody else, that now I have all the information on the documents on, et cetera. Even all the way up to John Mitchell, the United States Attorney General, you know, right after 1968, he's up on national television when Nixon is sworn in saying, by the end of this year, we'll be rid of these damn Black Panthers. We haven't even been charged with shit yet, you know what I mean? But they got their infiltrators, did what they did, et cetera. Next thing I know, by the mid part of the year, I'm falsely charged with some conspiracy to commit murder in New Haven. Of course, I won all of that stuff. But this particular film that Jeremy did here, I really like this film because, you know, for a 2-hour film, you squeeze in everything. He got enough meaning and stuff of my protest in that courtroom. And that's very important. So what the people would see in the film, they won't get that protest conflict situation. I mean, the way that it went down. And people don't know that for 3 weeks, Jerry and I are in jail together. We come to the court every day in jail. Jerry is serving 30 days, 30 days. And so it's 3 weeks that Jerry and I. So, I mean, I know these guards, I know these marshals. One guy just named him James Bond because he carried a sling shotgun in the courtroom under his trench coat, which I pointed out to Jerry in the yard at the jail, you know. And, you know, and then I met the guy who was slated to try to kill Fred Hampton in jail. And I walked up, they said, cell number 1, Seale, cell number 1. I walked to cell number 1. The guy went, you Bobby Seale? I said, yeah, man, what about it? I'm Jeff Ford, man. They tried to put me down. I said, put you down for what? Because I wouldn't take your boy Fred out. This is the one. So it's a documented letter that the FBI sent out to Jeff Ford. And then Fred Hampton saw me in jail. In other words, which determined the right to see him as a witness I wanted, that Lennie Weinglass went for. And then they let him come to jail because I wanted to talk to Fred Hampton. And that was at Cook County Jail that happened. But my point is that that's a whole cycle of things. Jerry Rubin and Abbie Hoffman, we would have conferences after the day's trial, a couple of times a week. And then 2 or 3 days to go to conference. Well, the conference was real quick, but me and Jerry and Abbie were left there because I was rapping to them a lot. They wanted to know more about me and the Black Panther Party. So in my screenplay, I flash back to the different periods, highlight periods of the party, how I organized 5,000 people across country and all this kind of stuff and other crap, you know, and how Marlon Brando came in. He was the one that caused all the donations to start coming in at the same time that I was creating breakfast programs, health clinics, and all this stuff. And the people were organized and all across country. I'd organized 5,000 people in 49 chapters and branches. And then I had all these coalition politics crossing all racial, ethnic lines, what have you, et cetera. And that is what the pig power structure was afraid of. Because when young white radicals, Black, and then the Civil Rights Organization, most people, I had a coalition with Dr. Martin Luther King's SCLC, Dr. Martin, the Reverend Ralph Abernathy actually called me. And this would be 5 weeks before Dr. King was killed. And this is, again, I agreed. I said, yes, I'll work with Dr. King on anything he wants to work on. I had these coalitions with them, other grassroots organizations, other known organizations such as Urban League, what have you, et cetera. And that is the kind of stuff that's reflected, at least I really respect it, in the present day marches that went down. You know what I mean? Black, white, blue, green, yellow, polka dot, whatever ethnic groups, who, et cetera, out there protesting. Black Lives Matter, that was a very important development against the backdrop in history of where we were coming from. Because Abbie and them said, oh, we never had no more than 5,000 or 6,000 people in the park, you know, boom, 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 and protesting at the Democratic Convention, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. I'm just saying that this is important. It was important that, I mean, it's bad that they've been killing Black folks and murdered Black folks from Jump Street. I mean, the slave trade itself, et cetera. But this story I want to tell, you know, I tell from my family coming out of slavery and being raised a carpenter and a builder and stuff, you know, so I had a lot of trades and skills, and then went in the Air Force and I mastered all my skill levels for structural repair and high performance aircraft, what have you, et cetera. So when I come out, I'm a detail organizer. I like to get everything down to the precinct that you're going to work in, and you're going to identify that precinct, and you're going to identify the people that's registered to vote in those areas. And this is the way I organize. And this is what scared the party, man. It had nothing to do with the fact that we had a few shotguns, you know, to defend ourselves. These guys looked up, and J. Edgar Hoover himself, when I had that breakfast program and it got popular, I mean, it spread like wildfire because my organization was spreading, et cetera. And J. Edgar Hoover jumps up, the Black Panthers Breakfast for Children program is a threat to the internal security of America. Well, that caused a lot of people to scratch their heads, you know what I mean? So they started calling up Brando, because everybody found out that Brando was donating. And I had them donate money through St. Augustine's Church, where we had our breakfast programs, where we had our voter registration drives, what have you, et cetera. And this was this dynamic of fast-paced organizing. So I only had 400 party members before Dr. King was killed, after that big rally in February, Free Huey rally. But the Free Huey rally was more than just Free Huey. It was about that coalition between SNCC and other grassroots people, the Peace and Freedom Party and all that. And that period, from the time King is killed to the time Nixon is elected 7 months later, my organization swelled to 5,000 people in 49 chapters and branches. And I went to practically every branch and location and chapter across country to speak, to teach these brothers that this is not about wanting a shootout. This is about getting political so we can get more politicians elected. In 1965, a year before the Black Panther Party started, I did a demographic search around the United States of America. I found only 55 Black folks duly elected to any political office anywhere in the United States of America, whether it was in a lower city council or something like this, et cetera, all the way up. That's all it was. And in 66, I started the Black Panther Party in October 66. Well, right here in Oakland and Los Angeles, about 15, 16 Black politicians got elected that November of 1966. And that's very important. So to say that we needed more Black politicians, well, really the concept, I didn't use it then, progressive politicians. Hey, Willie Brown and others, by 68, boom, 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 and 69, they jumped on J. Edgar Hoover, who's against the breakfast program. Man, they went and put a bill in. Ronald Reagan vetoed a bill in for $5 million a year for free breakfast and free lunch for all schools in the state of California. And Reagan vetoed $4 million of it. They sent it back to the state Senate and the state assembly, overrode his bill, put the whole damn $5 million in. And 28 state legislative bodies across the United States of America that year put those kind of programs. That's just one example of real social change coming from the grassroots up. This is where I was coming from, and trying to organize and get a real big political electoral system going where we change this thing, you know. And people, well, them limousine liberals. I said, well, I like my limousine liberals. I don't give a damn what you say, Brando, cause all kinds of, I raised what, like $600,000-700,000 in that year's period. From the time Brando gave me $5,000 before Martin Luther King was killed. And then when Martin Luther King was killed, he gave me another $7,000 and paid all the way for my people, 8 people, to go to Martin Luther King's funeral with him, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then I met all them actors. And I got up there and damn, I was shocked and happy. I mean, I'm shaking hands with Belafonte, Sidney Poitier, Sammy Davis Jr., Eartha Kitt, you know, and then some of the Peter Lawford. And I mean, this is what was happening. So I related to that. And more people, I'm telling you, Hollywood came through for me. And this is way before I was out of jail, you know, that I organized that dynamic. And that's when by 1969, John Mitchell is saying, by the end of this year, we're going to be rid of the Black Panthers. And of course, you know, they killed a lot of us, but we shot back. They killed 28 of us, and we killed 14 of them in defense of ourselves. I still got some political prisoners in the jail today. We got 3 or 4 of them out of prison. Some of the others have died. And if I can ever get a batch of money again, you know, 1 or 2 million, I'm going to put it up to see what we can do now with the politics that's coming with Biden and others, to see if I can even get these other 9 or 10 people who are political prisoners from our organization out. At any rate.
Thank you very much. I mean, you've set a whole new agenda for people. We're going to end up the speaking with Carl Lumbly, who plays Bobby in the film. And I think you'll discover is himself a remarkable person, that he was not just playing Bobby, he was defining himself. Carl.
I think that's a very apt way to put it. First, Bobby, man, great to see you. I hold deep in my heart all of those conversations we had initially when I made that trip out to the East Coast. And beyond your being gracious, beyond your being one of my cultural heroes, the size of your life force, the fact that my fear when I was cast in the role was that I would find you somehow diminished in spirit because of everything I knew about what you had gone through. And to my delight, you were like sunshine, man. You were as spicy as any of the barbecue recipes you had ever figured out to make. You were encyclopedic in a way that thrilled me, because it was, you had entries from every piece of your life, from the pain and the suffering, from the triumph, from the small joys, from the smiles on small children's faces. I think of you now, I thought of you then in link with Huey. And I know that, yes, that was in truth, but I think you were the chairman and he was the Minister of Defense. You were the man of mind and theory, and he was the man of action, the person who could get things activated in a way to enhance the ideas that the two of you are putting together, but that I credit you with being the fount. So my experience, and I'm going to be fairly brief because I'm going to, as they do in the Senate, yield back my time to you, Bobby. I felt when I was cast that I had won the lottery. I am the son of immigrant parents, and they came to this country based on the promise that the US trumpeted out to the rest of the world about this as being a place of freedoms. And so I watched my father and mother learn about what was truly taking place here and how freedom was not something being offered to everyone, that freedom had to be taken. My way was very, very different. I was cautioned to be, to not offer myself up for menace, knowing that menace was around, but to negotiate, to navigate. And I looked at what the Panthers did, and while I was not free to love you in the public setting in my home, I truly did. I thought that these were pictures of bravery that I could not even imagine. And so when I got the opportunity, which I will forever be grateful to you, Jeremy, I thought, this is a lucky break. I'm not going to tell Jeremy that I am not fit for this. I'm going to come meet Bobby, and I'm going to take in as much as I can so that I can represent what I thought you were, which was not simply representing yourself, but representing not simply Black people, because I know the feeling that the Black Panthers had about cultural nationalists and the idea of Black racism, which was the first time I had even heard that mentioned, and the fact that it was about coalition and it was about bringing all people together and realizing the degree to which everyone was at effect of racism, that it was not possible to be an oppressor without being oppressed. And so I stop it there. All kudos to you. It was my honor to be a part of it. And I'll tell you this, on the day we did all of that gagging and binding and shuffling about, and I was a younger, fairly robust person then. That night, I thought, how could you have gone through that? Not simply the physical nature of it, but the spiritual nature of it. The idea that there in the hall of freedom, in a courtroom of justice, with the world looking on, you would be treated like that. You would be gagged and bound simply because you refused to deny truth. It was humbling and infuriating. I don't know that I've ever felt rage like that, and I'm a very temperate person, but I don't know that I've ever felt rage like that. So I stop now. My time back to you, Bobby.
In that courtroom, that court recorder, she would send notes to me and said, "Speak up, Mr. Seale. It's all in your interest to speak up." She was doing that from the beginning of the trial, I'm telling you, because I would step to the lectern, you know what I mean, and say what I have to say. Because if you know anything about it, before the trial even started, I put a motion in to the right to defend myself, what have you, etc. My point is that, boom, she wrote down, I believe, "You hit me in my balls, motherfucker, Bobby Seale." But when I went back into the lockup and they was taking the gag off, I'm telling these guys, I'm going to take them to court. Arizona, the Black U.S. Marshal must have went back and told Judge Julius Hoffman what I said I was going to do, because I was angry. I'm going to get you guys for this, etc., because you beat me up in the chair, hit me 6 times. Anyway, my point is, then that's why I believe behind the scene, Judge Julius Hoffman told his court recorder, or however he did it, to change that. Bobby Seale didn't say that. One thing nobody never said, let the record show that Bobby Seale has fell into the seats and chairs of the artists. Let the record show that Bobby Seale has, that was never said for the court record. So it's easy for him to change that and have Jerry Rubin say that don't hit me in my balls, motherfucker. You see what I mean? And then charge him with contempt. Now, I had to go to another trial. So I'm in jail for a total of 2 years. I win that other case. I outsmarted the prosecutor over there. And what happens is that they bring me out of jail, and then we finally go to the courtroom, it's the circuit courtroom in Chicago. We fly there, me and my lawyer, Charles Gary, what have you, et cetera. And what they're showing is that Bobby Seale, in their motion to dismiss this, was the one who really stated, "You hit me in my balls," okay, and not Jerry Rubin, et cetera. You know what I mean, et cetera. And Bobby Seale stating to these other marshals what he was going to do, that caused, they believe, Judge Jules Hoffman to have the trial transcript change. Anyway, that's what have you. I won that other case hands down. I mean,
Bobby, could you?
I got a question for you.
Go
Bobby.
ahead, Jeremy.
So great, actually, to see all of you here right now. But Bobby, seeing what you learned about movement organizing, specifically Black Panthers, and seeing what's going on today with Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
What would you say has changed? What would you say needs to be continued?
Well, yes, it needs to be continued. See what happened here with the Black Lives Matter march, that in 2 weeks period, at a low, you had 10 million people protesting daily all across the country. We never had that many in the 60s. I mean, Abbie will tell you, we never had more than 5,000 people in the park in Chicago, you know, et cetera, blah, 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 blah. I would organize the rallies in the Oakland Auditorium, and 6,750 people, you know, because I must have organized rallies in that place 10 times over a period of time. I'm just saying, yes, it had to happen. I'm glad it happened. The Black Lives Matter movement, et cetera. But Black Lives Matter movement in me encompasses more than that. You know what I mean? And that's why I'm glad so many young white left radicals people were there. That's very important. You know, for all these ethnic groups of people and 10 to 20 million people protesting and marching behind Floyd, you know, that was just necessary. And I'm glad it happened and it evolved. I'm not glad that Floyd is dead or nothing. I'm not glad. I'm just saying it happened. And it's important that it happened, you know, and this guy's, we got to, I'm just, hope we just got to hurry up and get rid of, what's his name? See, I'm still organizing, man. I'm organizing a community cooperative housing development concept. You know, I'm working for the Dellums Institute for Social Justice. Ron Dellums, you know, he was my first politician who I met before he even ran for the city council of Berkeley, you know, and we was in coalition relationships, cross support all the way against the war and about our civil constitutional democratic civil human rights, as I like to put it and use those phrases. And from the beginning, I met Dellums before he ran for Berkeley City Council several months before, and then told him, no, brother, you run for them. Don't come out here in the streets with us. We were suggesting to patrol police then. You know, I want to see politicians because we don't have enough politicians. You know, when Robert Williams was in Monroe, North Carolina in 1959, and the NAACP told him, don't pick up no guns, leave. And he didn't want to leave. And then they kicked him out of the NAACP because they didn't have any politicians. And the sheriff was part of the Ku Klux Klan, who was driving through the Monroe, North Carolina community after it was peacefully protesting downtown. And Robert Williams was forced to leave the country, and I'm glad he did, because the NAACP says you got to go. Now, they wanted to criticize the NAACP. Well, by the time 60s hang, I got a coalition with the NAACP. You know what I mean? When I got to Connecticut, the NAACP, I took the state jails commissioner to court for violating the 8th Amendment of the Constitution there, federal court. And who backed me up? Roy Wilkins with the NAACP. So that coalition politics, crossing those racial and ethnic and human and organizational lines and groups and put together, moving the word Black power to all the people, is to muster the spirit and the need of the people for greater fair shares, equality, what have you, however you want to put it, you know. You know, at the tail end of my 10-point program, I put the first 2 paragraphs of the Declaration of Independence. And that little paragraph that says, when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursues and invariably evinces a design to reduce a people under absolute despotism, then it is the right of the people to alter or change that government and provide new guards for their future security and happiness. This continues today. I mean, this election is all about the same statement in the Declaration of Independence, United States of America. And I stand on that. I'm an American, an Earth citizen, a human citizen, a citizen of the United States of America. And that's what we have to see ourselves at, whether you're black, white, blue, red, green, yellow, or polka dot, or whatever ethnicity, etc. This is where you have to come from. And to me, these protests, this election, is just something I'm so happy for. That we're going to have the ability to move in this positive, progressive direction to get rid of this pandemic situation, but at the same time, the infrastructure and the ecology program, jobs, and all of this stuff. My program is community cooperative housing development, so I'm gonna be right out there. I have my nonprofit entities and all this kind of stuff set up, and I'm gonna be building houses because, well, I was raised a carpenter and a builder and an architect at age 16 with my father doing lot plot layouts and design and stuff, and my drawings and stuff passed license and inspection downtown Oakland. I mean, at 16, I was doing this, and my father's a master carpenter. My grandpa and them, they were on my father's side. They were all carpenters. And even my Aunt Ann, it wasn't but 6 of them, and she was a girl. She was a carpenter. Everybody was carpenters and builders. My father and his buddy, his cousin buddy, boom, they were running together. They were the same age, cousins. They had brand new cars during the Depression. I mean, they literally had brand new cars. These guys had jobs because the Seale family, the Seale plantation, people don't know about. You see what I'm getting at? The S-E-A-L-E, my last name, Seale. Okay, that's where my people evolved from. In Jasper, Texas, Jasper County was originally the plantation of the Seale family. And when the Juneteenth happened, what happens here is that my great-grandma Winnie, who I actually met at age 13, he was 104 or 5 years old. Okay, I'm just saying that's where I come from.
All right. And I mean, it's a fascinating story which you've shared with me, and I hope that there's an opportunity for people to see your biography. I wanted to, before we ended up, and we're losing people of the participants list, just one housekeeping thing, and then I want to introduce 2 people more. All of the chat will be available through the blog page, the information page. And also the Q&A, so you'll be able to go back and find out the information that was in the chat. Let me quickly introduce Marjorie, who is the daughter of the juror, and then I'm going to ask Natasha, Dave Dellinger's daughter, to say hello. So, Marjorie, why don't you?
By the way, if you do, I'm glad Dave Dellinger's there. If we have a second, I would love to show the minute of that's the truth of Dave reading, not the names of
Right. I think that'd be a great way to end it, Jeremy. Marjorie, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, that's kind of a hard act to follow. Yeah, I just, in all of the movies, much as I love Jeremy's movie, what this that I've seen, because
we're getting an echo, Marjorie. I think you're going around and your voice is coming back into your microphone. So turn off your something so that you're able to speak.
I don't know on here. Is it any better? Is that better?
Now you are, yeah.
Is that okay?
Go ahead, yeah.
Okay, no, it's just in so many of the movies, I think Jeremy's is the very best. And I worked in the film industry for many years, and my husband was a director of photography. But I mean, looking at it from the viewpoint of the jury, which is all left out in all of these movies, fortunately. My mother was into this situation, completely unaware of what she was getting involved in. And, 3 days into the trial, they were sequestered for 5 months. And we virtually lived in a police state for 5 months. Our mail was opened, our phones monitored. Mother wasn't even allowed to come home at Christmas. And, it was an eye-opening experience for her. And she, as I said, she kept a journal. And when as they tried to get her off the trial at one point, because they had her tagged as a sympathetic juror, she and three other women, none of them innocent on all. And when they got into the deliberation room, I mean, my mother, when Bobby Seale was bound and gagged, she was mortified. I mean, she was shaking and crying in the courtroom. She wrote extensively about that in her journal. When they finally got into the deliberation, Judge Hoffman refused the hung jury notices they sent him. He also would not give them transcript of the trial. They were threatened by the marshals. The marshals told them that they were going to keep her until they reached a verdict. And the other eight of them guilty on counts were very dismissive and rude to my mother. And they didn't think that, she knew what she was doing. And my mom, they reached a compromise verdict virtually because Mom, in her own way, had done a jury not too long for that one. And they reached a hung jury verdict, and the case was retried. She was worried that the case would be retried, even though she wanted them innocent on all counts. So they reached a compromise verdict, which, in fact, had nothing to do with case. She just wrote that in the Sun Times, but that really was not the case. So my mom felt, as a result of that, she had betrayed herself, and she was very upset. She had a nervous breakdown. This trial was a life-changing experience for her. And the day she got home, news media where she would not speak to anyone. And we had death threats, we had hate mail. Longtime friends of hers stopped speaking to her. The FBI was following us for months after the trial. They would come to my dad's door. My mom had to wait for a while because she was so visibly, physically and mentally and emotionally upset. She never trusted her government again. She became a lifelong liberal Democrat. In her journal, her understanding, insight, and the fact that she was to see what the government was doing just made me so proud of her. And then eventually, I think it was in August of year the trial was over, August 1970, Shirley Seaholm gave an interview to John Schultz in Evergreen Magazine. John Schultz was a journalist at Columbia, a Korean writing teacher at Columbia College in Chicago. He wrote several books about the trial. And she gave the interview to Evergreen Magazine, and they told the truth about everything that had gone. She unfair she felt Judge Hoffman was. He was never an impartial judge. Everything that the marshals had done took place in the deliberation room. And partially as a result of that interview that they gave, these two special hearings were convened. And all of the jurors and Hoffman and the were called in to testify. And my mom testified, and a lot of the other jurors were visibly afraid, and I understand that. They just said they didn't remember, but my mom, again, told the truth about everything that happened, stood up for what she believed in. We actually got a personal letter of thanks from Studs Terkel for her bravery and her courage. And, so she was, the compromised verdict didn't have to be that bad of a thing, because some time later the charges were overturned. My mother, as always, of that, she kept in touch with a lot of the defendants over the years. They sent her books, authors sent her books, and it's my mom. That's why I have curated this exhibit at the Edgewater Historical Society in Chicago, and kept everything for my mother, everything that was written, every book, every magazine article that was written while she was sequestered, and because she wanted to read everything when she got home. And it has, a lot of the archiving information, journal, interviews he gave to Bissler's daughters, also American Justice Series A and EO that she was interviewed in. And it's she died 2 years ago, a couple of months before her 100th birthday. So she never got to see the exhibit. But her journal is really, really worth reading. It gives you the viewpoint from the other side and how important that jury was. And my mom kept writing in her journal all the time. She said, I have no right to sit in judgment of these men. Nobody in the jury had a college education. Of course, that was put that way by the government. And she didn't, that she was intelligent enough to sit in judgment of these men. But, in the long run, they were, the way I look at it, they were really lucky that she was there. And her journal is available on our site, the Edgewater Historical Society website. There's a link to her journal. Also the
Okay, Marjorie.
Yeah.
We need to
yeah.
End this. So thank you very much. And there's information on the chat from Marjorie and I think a website there. I want to give the panelists, we're not unfortunately really going to have time to do questions, but I want to ask panelists if they want to make any last comment before we end this up. Raise your hand or go ahead, Jeremy.
Since we're talking about the movie, I'd like to share this moment. I know that David Dellinger's daughters were so upset about the portrayal of David hitting someone in the new movie, which he would never have done. I just want to share this because it's a minute from the film. But what's important is that David understood that this was a horrendous war, and it was not just Americans who were being killed, but it was Vietnamese as well, and he read their names in the trial. And I'd like to just share that, just a minute clip.
Okay, go ahead.
Dave Dellinger was knocked on the table by Goliath.
Isn't that the context?
He body slammed Dave Dellinger onto the defense table, coming at me.
Our point of view was that we were being diverted from our primary job. Our primary job was to organize anti-war activities.
And we wanted to participate very seriously in the Vietnam moratorium. It may have been the largest nationwide turnout of Americans against any war in American history.
Troops.
Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Julius J. Hoffman presiding.
Your Honor, we have made a motion for the suspension of the trial for tomorrow, which is being declared a day called Vietnam moratorium. Mr. Men escaped to Chicago to protest this brutal imperialistic war. They feel they are being prosecuted for doing so. I think it's very fitting for them to be permitted to join the millions of countrymen who desire the same thing.
Your Honor, there's been some evidence presented that these men took part in a cynical plan to use the tragic issue of the war to tear down the formal structure of the government of the United States. Many of us feel the tragedy of war, especially some of us who have fought in one, and that they should now ask to join with maybe a sincere effort.
Your Honor, I think these personal attacks of the defendants are uncalled for. I think they are making a fervent request to protest the deaths of thousands, millions of innocent people whose lives have been corrupted and prevented by the utter horror that goes on in your name and in my name. Not in my name. It is in your name too. The name of the United States.
You just include yourself. Don't join me with you, goodness. Defendant's motion for an adjournment will be denied.
Wow! Good God, y'all! Absolutely! Let's get started again!
The names of those who died in the war this week are Mark King, Thomas Diaz, Tron T. Line, Charlie Cohen, Lee Hu, Richard Washington, Fong Bach, Alan Peterson, Tron Von Duke, Roger Briansky. Hey, come on! Mr. Hoffman, we are observing a moratorium.
I'm Judge Hoffman, sir.
I believe in equality, sir, so I prefer to call people Mr. or by their first name.
Just wanted to share that moment because it's a big moment in the new movie, but the truth was it was David.
Okay, thank you very much. I wanted to end up with one last comment from our work together. I said at the beginning that Tom Hayden was one of the source people for the Vietnam Peace Commemoration Committee. In Tom's last book, if you go to our channel, which is where we'll be putting the video from this webinar as well as the other ones already up, you'll see a whole lot of videos from a conference we did in 2015 in Washington. And Tom is particularly eloquent talking about the fact that of all of the social movements that have shaped us in the last 50 years, the one that totally disappears is the anti-war movement. We saw in the PBS series about the Vietnam War, there was almost a deliberate effort to poison the memory of the anti-war movement and to pit us against veterans with whom we were in solidarity and worked closely together. And it's been a process of 50 years of trying to destroy or erase the history. And as Tom pointed out, it's the one movement. I was struck when Elizabeth Warren spoke in Washington Square, and Elizabeth was the candidate I personally supported. She listed all of the movements of the 20th century and didn't mention the anti-war movement. When Barack Obama gave his big speech a month or two ago on television, he listed all of the movements of the 20th century and didn't mention the anti-war movement. I think the only way the anti-war movement, and Tom's thesis was that the anti-war movement had to be forgotten because it is the one incident in American history where a movement stopped a war. There were anti-war movements in every other American war. Abraham Lincoln was part of the anti-war movement about the war with Mexico. But all of them were repressed or minimized and they didn't have any impact. But the Vietnam anti-war movement did have an impact, did bring the war to an end through a lot of struggle and suffering and costs. And what we've been watching today is a reminder of one of those costs. I think that to all of the alumni of that era, whether you were activists and defendants or the actors who gave the permanent presence of the defendants. I think we owe everybody, we owe all of us, all of us are part of that history. And I think all of us have a few more years in which we can struggle to make that history better known. So we'll do a follow-up mailing. The Vietnam Peace Commemoration Committee would be happy to have your support, whether it's financial. These things do cost money to organize. The Zoom costs, the webinars in particular, they charge a substantial amount from the Zoom company. So whatever is possible, we'd be grateful. But also, if you want to become involved, we're going to be working through a lot of, there will be another film in a month, The War at Home, which is based in Madison, Wisconsin, and its experience in the anti-war movement. And the panel there will include Heather Booth, who was very active in the anti-war movement, and then went on to many other struggles in terms of American justice. And thanks to Heather, somebody from March for Our Lives will be talking about how that movement relates to the anti-war movement. And we're hoping to have, again, somebody from Black Lives Matter to participate. The other thing that we're doing that everybody can be involved in is that on April 4th is the anniversary of Martin Luther King's assassination, but it's also the anniversary a year before of his absolutely essential sermon or speech at Riverside Church, where he took great risks with his supporters and his constituency by talking about the Vietnam War. And we're hoping, it can be watched, you can find it on our website, it can be listened to, it can be read, but we're hoping that it will be read all over the country by people, read as a group project. So there's other things coming up in the spring. It's the anniversary of the Spring Offensive with the veterans tossing their medals at the Capitol, of the Pentagon Papers release, of the People's Peace Treaty, of the May Day demonstrations. So all of that will be coming back to in webinars and in maybe some in-person events. But again, thank you all for what you have done all your lives. And thank you, Brewster, for playing the bad guy of reminding people of time. Brewster was slightly younger than most of us, but he was as a student in the People's Peace Treaty, and then he worked in Washington in the Coalition to Stop Funding the War, which was the mechanism that we finally used to bring peace to Indochina. So thank you very much. Everybody will receive a follow-up mailing. It'll take me a day or two to get this program onto our YouTube channel, but you'll get the link for it. Again, the bios are there. There are books. Corinna's written 2 books, and John's book is there. Lee's book is there. And you'll get more information about the people who we've heard today. So thank you very much. Goodbye to all, and to the 110 people who are still with us. Bye-bye.
Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Active. Great to see you all.